Welcome to Guy Code, a podcast dedicated to imparting dad wisdom to my son, with your host, Koji Steven Sakai, and friends.
Welcome. This is Koji, and this is episode number 37. I wanted to impart all my wisdom to my son, but of course, my son already thinks he knows more than me. So instead of trying to tell him how now and having it go one ear and out the other ear, I decided to record them here with the hopes that maybe, just maybe, when he's ready, he'll listen to my advice in the future and not make the same stupid mistakes I did. I also bring on my guests to impart their advice as well. I have no doubt their advice will be better than mine. This week, I brought on my friend, Pilar Diaz. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am good. Pilar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I always think of myself as the oldest of six. Wow. And I've used that as a base because I think that explains a lot about who I am and how I see the world, being a supervisor and then just getting things done. You said wisdom, and it made me think of your wife because probably some of the things I'm going to say is the wisdom that I got from her. Wow. So I'm going to pass it on to you, what I got from her. Recently I've just been loving LA is what I've been doing. I've been going around to different places, and I just am, I don't know what else to say about myself.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm happy you're here because I've had a string of male guests, I think like 10 male guests in a row, and I've been trying desperately to find somebody from not male that could give advice as well. So I'm glad you're here. So why don't we get into our advice? What do you have a first piece of advice you want to share?
The first piece of advice I would share, and I've been really thinking about this within the last 2 years, I would say, and I actually got this from Facebook, is do not shrink. Hold on, I wrote it down. Don't shrink to fit places you've outgrown.
What do you mean by that?
I'm at a point in my life now where I've done a lot of different things. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And then, there are the comfort zones. And it's so easy to go into the comfort zones. And that's not really a productive place to be. It's really good. I've really learned the importance of taking risk, of just trying something new, because whatever you do, I don't know, the next things for me have always made sense. Really, I guess it's just leaving the comfort zone.
I love that phrase. I've never heard that before, but I do think that that's something that's really important to do, and because it's kind of almost like not shooting for something that's small, like shooting for the stars, as opposed to shooting for something that's like closer. Because then if you're shooting for something closer, you might get it, but then you're gonna not be who you could ultimately be. How do you do this in practice in your life?
I really just trying different things, because a lot of it also in reflecting like where I am now. I'm gonna be in my mid-40s this month.
Happy
officially.
birthday.
Thinking about what I've done, I always think of you. And when my birthday is, same day as your wife's.
Oh wow, that's right.
So yeah, I just think about what I've done, and I think about my parents a lot. And I think about the things that I've accomplished and what they've had to sacrifice for me. And really, I go back to, have I done what they've done for me some justice? For me to be just comfortable, to be mediocre, to be doing the same things, is that what they wanted from me? Mm-hmm. And it's not that it's not okay to be, where you are, because you can be really, really happy. At the same time, if there's something missing, if there's something you want to try, I think about my parents did all these things for me so that I could try to do different things. Like right now, I'm in what I guess fun employment, and I have the luxury to just chill out for, I don't know how long, a few months to figure it out. And I was telling my boyfriend that I felt really guilty because I'm like, my parents didn't have me time. They had, my dad had 3 jobs at some point, and here I am just kind of like chilling out, right? To figure it out, whatever that means, right? And then, he said, your parents did a lot of the things that they did so that you could have the time to not stress out, to figure out what you want to do. You're in a good place, you've planned for it and everything, but really what do you want to do, and don't go back to where you feel comfortable, because that's not doing it justice either. So it's really like the taking the risk to do different things, to push yourself a little bit. To, you know, for me, one of the other things that I also think about, and maybe this is another advice, is, and I tell this to mostly my girlfriends who are women of color, is what would a white guy do? Because a lot of times as we second guess ourselves, or we go back to that comfort zone, or it's easier, or we want to be nice, or because if we don't do this, then we're representative of our race, or whatever group we think we're going to be, you know, put in. But I think about it, and really one of the reasons I started playing golf. I played a lot of golf, and it was a way for me to push myself into those spaces that I normally wouldn't be in, country clubs. And I have a lot of country club stories. But at the same time, those experiences of uncomfortable and people saying things to me that, you know, eyebrow raising and like, really, did they just say that? Really pushed me to become stronger, and also be able to be around those people and then hold myself to a certain extent and know that I can be at that level, that I can be in their environment. And also like, hey, I am in your environment. You have to, you know, you have to figure out what you're going to do with me or not.
Yeah. Can I ask a random question? Were your parents immigrants?
Yeah. So my parents moved from, I was born in the Philippines. It was my dad first. Moved to Colorado, and then my mom and my at the time 4 other siblings and I moved 2 years later. And I didn't realize it until recently that we were living in a martial law. So when I talk to my nieces and nephews who are sad because of Zoom and they can't see their friends and watch TV, I kind of reflect like, man, when I was their age, I was actually, there's blackouts, there were riots going on, and I was living under martial law, and which was
in the Philippines.
In the Philippines, and why we left. Yeah, and then my mom made a, you know, just told us recently, said, can you explain this to me? You know, what's going on to me, because like I don't really understand democracy, because I've really only lived under the martial law. I'm like, wait a minute. And I Googled and then looked up like when all this stuff happened, like, dang, that's so true. And she's all pumped up about the election. So just kind of thinking about that, I think also shaped me with, my parents didn't make all this sacrifice for me to be, to function in this like whatever way, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I was gonna say two things. One is I always think it's funny that when people hate immigrants, because immigrants are like the hardest working people, and they like, nobody comes like 3,000 miles or crosses an ocean and doesn't speak the language very well, or doesn't have a lot of opportunities without wanting to work really hard. Like every immigrant I know is like the hardest working people. The people I think that are the people that are worthless are a lot of people that are born here. Like a lot of like they're like lazy. They're messing around. They're not like serious. But like my mom was an immigrant and she worked really hard. She was like, when I would never do what she did. I would never move to a country where I didn't know the language, and I'm functionally illiterate and functionally going to be like a lower class citizen. That's just not, that's not in me. I understand that. And I that's why it always blows my mind when people hate immigrants. So like, in fact, I think we need more of them. Can we kick people out of this country who are,
I mean, it's crazy because like people rip on immigrants all the time. Like, okay, really, like that movie a few years ago with Imagine the World Without Immigrants.
Yeah.
And then just a contribution to society. And yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to say about the trying stuff. Yeah. My mom always used to say to me that the reason she cut hair for a living. And she used to say she works with her hands, so I don't have to, and that always stuck with me, and that, that like, she never wanted me to do any kind of job where I had to work manually. Yeah. Like and I think for her, it was important. It was an important thing for her to be like, I'm working hard so that you don't have to do what I do, kind of thing, which I think I didn't appreciate until, I became an adult. But the other thing I wanted to say is I love the idea of working hard to like pushing yourself in ways that are uncomfortable. Like one of the big challenges that I had with my son was that he does jujitsu, right? He does Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I noticed for
In
a
your
while,
dojo?
no, like back when we could do jujitsu in a real place. And I remember he'd fight all these kids that he could beat. And I'd tell him, hey, these kids you could beat easy. Why don't you go fight that kid? He's harder.
It's
And he's
so
like, he's older, he's
true.
bigger. I'm like, so, like that's the guy you're gonna get better with. These other kids you're fighting, they're no challenge. You could like go half-ass and you could beat them, but like, why don't you take on somebody that you can't beat? And then eventually when you beat them, you'll actually like improve.
It's so true. So two things on that. One is with golf. I like playing golf with people who are a lot better than me. And I tend to play better and then I've gotten better because of that. And then the other thing too is, again, when I started working with her wife, she's like wicked crazy smart. And she'll just say these things and I'll think about it. And then I'm like, that makes so much more sense. I really like talking to her because she'll ask me questions and I'm like, I don't know. And then she'll push me and push me. And then I'm like, oh, and then I'll think some more about it. And then, there's growth. She's gotten me to think about a lot of different things. And I like being around people who are like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too, is like being around people who are smarter than you, who bring in things that are, that are different than what you bring in. Like, don't just be around people you're comfortable with or, who are just like you.
Yeah. That's actually great. I had the superintendent of Linwood Unified on here, and he had a phrase in Spanish. I forgot. Obviously, I don't know Spanish, and I can't repeat it to you. But his phrase was something to the effect of like, "You are who you hang out with."
Yeah.
And he was talking about teenagers, and he was saying, like you could tell what kind of grades a kid's getting. You could tell like what their future is going to be like by who they're surrounding themselves with at like 17 or 13. And I think that that's super true. It's like, if you're around people who are entrepreneurs or pushing or taking risks and good risks, not bad risks, but taking good risks and are like smart, that those are the people that they're going to push you to do that. It's kind of like the analogy I always say is that when I play my son in chess, I'm better than him because I'm older, obviously. But every time I play him, I get worse because I'm playing somebody who's not as good. So I don't have to think as much. But every time he plays me, he gets better because he has to push to beat me. And I think that it's just the same way in real life. If you're around people that are pushing you not to be the best you could be, you get down to their level and you never really achieve what you want to achieve. I think that's really, really great. And by the way, my wife is the only person who makes me feel like I'm not smart. So
no, she's just like, she has all these wisdoms that we used to have little stickies that, where we wrote them down and then little reminders for me, just a bunch of stuff. I mean, I learned so much from her. Yeah. So no doubt your son will be like amazing.
Yeah. But even like her job, like her new job at that company, she, that was like a risk, right? That, could she do it? Would she do it? It's totally different than everything she's done up to that point. And I think it was good for her in order to try to do something new, instead of just being whatever before, right? Being a program officer for the rest of her life. Like she wants to try to do something else and change,
Well, then the other thing about her too, that I learned from her, I'm telling you, like I learned so much from her, is really the being, myself. And I didn't really know how to, because when I think of myself, sometimes when I'm like, who am I? It's like I can't just say I'm Pilar, I'm this. I'm like Pilar, I'm Pilar plus. Like, yes, I'm a little extra at times, but like Pilar plus, because I'm not just, Filipina or, really someone who really loves parks. And there's so much more. I have a lot of like randomness in me, but part of that too, I got from your wife, because when I met her, I'm like, oh my God, she's like super duper smart. But then we would also talk about Gossip Girl, like that TV show on CW and then the fashions. And before her, I didn't really have a lot of friends that had a lot of different, I don't know, it's not experience, but just the different types of things about them. A lot of my friends were activists, and we talk about activist stuff. But with her, we were able to talk about work stuff, the state of the world, politics, and TV shows that feature high school students. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's really cool to just really think about having that range and having different kinds of friends and being comfortable with the different things that you bring in where, like now I think some people you say like, oh, this is my guilty pleasure watching Beverly Hills, the housewife shows. Like, you just watch it. It doesn't have to be like a guilty pleasure. It's just
Yeah.
watch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like when people are embarrassed by the books they read, that they're reading like a Danielle Steele or something, which is terrible, but but like, but or whatever kind of books. But to me, it's like, well, if you enjoy those books, you should be reading those books. It's like that's why I don't. I would
Right.
never push my son to read like, oh, you have to read Great Gatsby, or
Yeah.
you have to read this book, you have to read that book. I mean, you should at some point. I think those are important books to read, but at some point, like in order to love reading, you have to read the things that are interesting to you, right? Like
Right.
I loved baseball as a kid, and so I read a ton of baseball. I read only baseball books for like 4 years of my life, and that's what gave me the love of reading, though. And eventually, I ended up reading all of the other important books that are important too. But it's like people are so ashamed sometimes of these things. Like I love like terrible movies. Like I'm not ashamed of it. I love like these
They're the
movies.
best.
Yeah, like I love like Titanic. I don't know if I ever told you, Titanic's my favorite movie of all time. I've watched it like 10 times in the theater. I watched it 10 times. I've watched it like at least 100 times in my life. And but it's
But
like,
you're not the only guy who has.
no, yeah, but it's fine. And like, I mean,
Yeah.
I would never say it's like a wonderful movie, like,
Right,
but it's just like
right.
when it's on, I watch it, and
Right.
I like quote things from it. But anyway, the other thing that I want to go back to, one thing that you said, which I thought was really powerful, is that, act like a what would a white guy do, or act like a white guy, right? I think that's a really powerful thing, because I think as people of color, we've been taught subconsciously or sometimes overtly as well, of that, you have to like kind of know your place in kind
Right.
of the things. And like when I walk into a room, I'm counting people of color, like unless it's like something where a lot of people of color are going to be, but like if it's not like a normal event, I'm counting people of color, and I'm seeing like how it's going to react to me. And that's a privilege that people who aren't people of color don't have to worry about. And I think that would be really healthy for people to for a person of color to kind of just be like, I got to act like I own this place. Like I got to act like I belong here, that I don't have to be quiet, especially as an Asian. I don't have to be quiet. I don't have to be demure. I don't have to like I could be loud. I could be whatever I want to be, and it's okay. Right. And that's what I take from that. And I think that's really powerful. And obviously I think it's also more powerful for a person of color who's a woman, but even for a man, I think there's similar things there.
I mean, and I think also, I mean, in asserting myself, I found out to be really important, and to just really remember that, and then just in speaking in my own voice. Because when I get in certain positions, I feel like I have to talk like a policy person and use the words and use the lingos. And then that was just like, okay, that's not me. I don't even know what I'm saying. But when I started speaking like how I would speak, then it made more sense, and I could really speak what I want to say. And that, I mean, that even happened when I was, on a commission. I'm like, I felt like I had to speak like a commissioner. I'm like, after the second meeting, like, I don't know what this even means, but I do want to ask questions about these things. And then after I started just speaking it in my own voice, and I felt like I was really contributing, because if I'm not, then I don't even know who I am. And I don't even know why I'm there. And I got that from a friend, and he spoke like, he'll be on interviews and he'll say, homie, like he's just like very like layperson, but he got his point across. And I was like, oh, I get what he's saying, and like, I don't have to use these terms all the time when necessary, like, yes, but I can be myself. And I think really seeing other people that push themselves, and then that I looked up to, that really allowed me to, really have my voice and find my voice, and then also be in the position with people who don't look like me, who are, in powerful positions or whatever, and then be able to like represent.
Yeah. And but I will play the opposite as well, because I think it's important that everybody puts themselves in other people's shoes as well. Like me and my son were running the other day in here around South Pasadena, in kind of a nice part of South Pass. And I remember telling him, if we were two young Black men running around this area at 6 o'clock in the morning, that might not be safe.
Yeah.
And I was like, we have to be cognizant of what it would be like for other people as well. you know, and I think that a lot of our problems in our society would be a lot would be solved, especially our president, but a lot of our issues would be solved if we just we just put ourselves in other people's shoes. Like this is a rant, it would be a quick rant, but you know, it's like, to me, it's like one of the biggest things that bother me about the conservative right now is that it's like, why do you have to have the experience in order to feel empathy for other people? Like it drives me nuts when people say oh, my cousin or something is gay, and so that's why I
Right.
like gay people and I'm okay with gay. I'm like, well, I don't have anyone in my family that's gay, and I'm okay with gay people. Like they could get married.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I don't need somebody in my life. I don't need somebody to get AIDS or to have like or be like black for me to be like okay with black people. Like I could already, before anything happens to me or in my life, like COVID, I'm like, I don't have to know anybody with COVID in order for me to feel sorry for COVID people and want to help them or want to do my duty or whatever I can to like wear a mask or something. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
crazy to me. So empathy. I wish more people had empathy.
It's hard. And I think, I mean, I don't know if it's, no, I do know. Like as people of color, I think as we think in communities, not individuals. So I think we always think about like what is, for the good of the communities, whereas in some communities or some neighborhoods or groups, it's not. It's about what are my rights? How does it benefit me? Whereas we think of what is for the good of all.
Yeah. And
Like
that's
you don't have to be a member of that group.
yeah. And that's what and to your point about being, think of like as a white guy, like I think that's where we go wrong is we're so worried about how our group will accept that whatever we're doing sometimes that
Yeah.
it keeps us from like, because we don't want to like, I never want to like speak for Asian Americans, for
Right.
example, but then I also don't want to make like I don't want to be an embarrassment to Asian American people. Like I don't want to stop it.
Right.
And that's like the challenge is like you can't, it's like that fine line, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's, like the theory of other, like we always think as people of color, like psychology is that there's always the other. It's not just like, I'm going to do this, but there's also like as a person of color, right? So there's that. So it's hard. And then also, in a sense, our communities also judge us
Yeah.
because many a time it's like, are you blank enough? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just me. I'm just doing me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I worked at the Japanese American National Museum, I had a person who was applying for an internship, and she was Papa, and she was crying to me and saying she didn't feel Japanese. That's why she wanted to work there. And after the internship, I pulled her aside. I said, or after the interview, I said, "Hey, you're Japanese American if you say you're Japanese American. Like, who are these people saying that you're not Japanese American? Like, who are these police coming around like, like I don't go around saying like you're Japanese American, you're not Japanese. I mean, like if you are, you are, and that's okay. And if they have a problem with that, that's their problem, not yours. You are who you are, you know. Like, and if you want to call yourself Asian American or Oriental, I don't care.
Oh my God.
You are who you are. And I'm like, and it really got to me that this person felt like she wasn't because other people. And I'm like, well, it's personal. I don't know. Anyway, we're going super off topic here, but I'd love to hear. Do you have any other advice?
Well, I think on that, to what you said is like, it's exhausting to have those conversations because even in this day and age, the Asian American, Filipino American, are we Pacific Islanders as Filipinos? I don't know. I mean, there's so many different things, going on, and it's exhausting. I mean, at the end of the day, I think for me, I just really go back to my family and really who I am. And then I think, I mean, I really kind of go back to my parents of when everything else is so confusing, I think about the wisdom that they have shared with me. And then going back to they're immigrants, they did all this stuff. So everything else is, everything else is just whatever because they've fought for me and I don't need to define who I am. No one else needs to define who I am. Like I know who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's one of the struggles that people sometimes don't. And then they let other people define them. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems with the Asian American community. To be honest, it's like, man, well, just because you're kind of accepted doesn't mean you're not Asian or you're not a minority or you're not a person of color. Just because you get some of the benefits, it doesn't mean that like me and my son drove through California, like rural parts of California, and I had a weapon because I was like, I don't know if I'm safe. I have a I have a mask on. I'm Asian. They don't know if I'm Chinese or Japanese or whatever I am, right? And like. I can't take my privilege and
Yeah.
like when they
Yeah.
see me, I don't know what they're thinking. And so you have to be, I don't know. Anyways, this is the whole thing, but I love that piece of advice. And how do you live, how do you do that though? Like, how do you practice that?
How
Like,
do I practice?
being authentic and not letting other people, tell you who you are.
I think a lot of it is really, one is age,
Okay.
because I've done a lot. I've gone through a lot. I don't mean like I have hardships, but I've faced certain, challenges and had to make certain decisions. And I am where I am. I'm happy with where I am. So I must have made good decisions. And then I really go back to my family, and just, I know my roots. I know my parents have done the best that they could. They've shared a lot of things that I start going back to now, not quite intentional, where what would I do? What did my mom say about this? It's just almost, I just do it. And
Yeah.
then surrounding myself with really, really good people. I do have contacts with people that may not be the greatest, because I do learn from them. Not all my friends are liberal. Not all my friends who are liberal are in the same spectrum of liberalness. And it's good. But I think, just really not worrying so much about what other people say
Yeah.
or do.
Yeah, to me, it's one of the great things about one of the only things that this learning outside of school for my son, I think, is that I'm able to talk to him about the history of the United States and being proud of who you are. Because I think a lot of it comes from like, oh, you're ashamed of being Asian, or you're ashamed of being Black, you're ashamed of something, and it's like, no, there's a lot of amazing things about all cultures, and I think a lot of times that shame is what makes people feel like they're lost.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to talk about being Japanese or talk about being Asian American or whatever it is, right? And so one of the good things about this whole time is like I'm showing him things. We're reading things that are about Japanese Americans and that did that good, not just about camp or just about this or that. Like we're looking at history from the perspective of African Americans and Latinos and other people, and being like that. This country's history is very complicated but good,
Yeah.
and it could be, and there's this place of strength when the history. That's why I just got in an argument with one of my friends, not really a friend, but he's like always saying that I always talk about bad things about the government, and I'm like, but that just means I love it more. I love it more than you. Like I love it more than you because I understand that it's not perfect, right? That we've had a lot of crazy and
Yeah.
bad shit that happened, but I accept it and we can move on. But we have to understand, we have to accept it first. It's like in a family, I'm not like everyone in my family is
Right.
wonderful and there's no problems. It's like, no, we're all fucked up. Right?
Yeah.
But we can still love you even though we know you're fucked up a little bit. But how do we
Yeah.
move forward? Right? How do we move
Right.
forward from there?
Yeah. I mean, lately I've been doing a lot of stuff in LA, and it's exactly the same thing with like LA's history is so
Oh yeah.
complicated. I was at Griffith Park this morning, and just looking at it, I'm like, man, this was Tongva land, and then colonialism,
And
like all this stuff, right?
did you know they locked up Japanese Americans there?
I did not.
They did. There was a camp there. There's a assembly center,
Hmm.
like
Maybe
a Department of Justice camp. There's like one. I think there's like one picture. Like there's very little few pictures, but there's one picture of it. Anyway, sorry.
no, I take it back. I think it's in the book this book that I'm reading, the Discovering Griffith Park book. It has a lot.
It's in there.
So I think
Yeah.
it's So I don't know where it is. I'm gonna look for it because I'm rereading. I mean, I'm doing the hike, so I'm rereading it. But yeah, I mean, it's like it's so like it's full. Thank you, Griffith J. Griffith. But then there's also the Native Americans. There's also the Spanish. Like it's so much. It's complicated. It's not just good or bad. And I think it's important for kids to learn that it's not good or bad, but there are different sides based on the perspective.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on Native American. I mean, this is my big pet peeve: is that the way we teach history, American history, is jacked up. I mean, the perception that America was this blank land is crazy to me. That like this was one of the most diverse places on earth in terms of language, religion, like ethnicities, and then it was like it wasn't just empty. Like we had people living here, lots of people, lots of communities, but yet we persist on this. Like even like my son's school, that's what they teach. You're just like, no, that's not true at all. Like that's the opposite of the truth.
I mean, that's the oh my God. I'm doing this because I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, so this is the thing. So in my last job, I dealt it was working with different groups, Pacific Islanders. So when we think of Pacific Islanders, it's like Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, like everybody there, right? Like in the Pacific, but they each have their own history. So then our team was also part of the group, the tribal and First Nations, and so like that was what our group was a part of, and just really learning about the different groups and the different governments that exist, and then the different types of tribal government, and then with Pacific Islanders, there's Polynesia, Melanesia, Micronesia. You know what I mean? Like there's so much more than just Hawaii and Pacific, and and Fiji. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's one of the things. Like, how do I share with people that when people certain things? How do I? Sometimes like, how do I not get irritated at some of the things? And that's when I have to like just chill and figure out a way to share other things that's in a different way. So with social media, I've actually been like somewhat strategic now, like what I share. I don't talk about politics really, but within my posts, there are certain values in there that I actually have gotten comments from friends who are on the opposite side that like, oh, that's a great idea. And I'm like, but you oppose that idea if I put it as a, as a political thing. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Asian, it's like affirmative action. It's like, if you talk to Asians, they always have such issues with it, but I'm just like, you guys don't understand. But anyway, I mean, I was actually on a panel about Asian Americans once, and I was like, or about affirmative action. I was like, I mean, I'm like philosophically against, I'm for I'm for it because I think that like a school should be diverse. I think the school is better when it's diverse, right? That there's a lot of different voices, not just racially, but ethnically, but also religious and gender. All of it's like very good. But what bothers me always is that it's like, well, when it's like when Caucasian people look at like black or brown people, they say, well, it should be about numbers, right? It should be purely. And then they look at Asians, they're like, well, it should be about more than just numbers. Yeah. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. Like, like Harvard would be like 99% Asian or, Asian American.
Right.
Like if it was purely about numbers. But like, I don't even want that. But then you can't turn it around on us and say, well, it should be about other things. So like, to me, it's like, well, let's make it fair. It should be not just about numbers for everybody, like, and that's okay with me. But I know a lot of Asian Americans, that's a controversial opinion amongst Asian Americans because they feel like they get hurt. But I don't feel sorry for them if they don't get into Harvard and they get to like Berkeley. That's fine. They're going to Stanford still. It's okay. You're like your life will be fine.
Oh man, yeah. I'm a member of some Facebook groups. I'm like, oh boy, I want to give your kid a hug.
Yeah. Well, like so. This will be the last thing. Well, we should get off soon. But like the Tiger Mom thing. It's like. It's actually, in terms of one of the reasons why Asian Americans have done better in terms of schooling and other stuff is because like their expectations are higher. It's like you're not just going to a school, you're going to Harvard. You're not just playing the piano. You're going to go to like, you're going to play at the Met or something, right? You're like you're not going to be a politician. You're the president. And what happens is that when you and kind of goes to your first point is when you have higher goals, you tend to reach higher. You might not get to those goals, but what I always say though, the flip side of that is where Asian Americans go wrong is that we start to withhold love if we don't reach that goal. Like you didn't get to Harvard, we don't love you, which is not the right opinion. It's like, I want you to go to Harvard, but if you go to Berkeley, I still love you. Like that's still an awesome school. Congratulations. Like if you're not the president, but you made like state senator, that's awesome. That's amazing. Right? But it's like, I think that a lot of Asian parents, especially the parents and generation a little bit, probably a couple generations older than us, is that's when they're like, oh, well, you didn't go to Harvard. I don't love you as much because you're a failure. That's where it goes wrong.
I mean, that's one thing that I would like give my parents hard props. They never told us, or they never told me not to drink or smoke or anything or what I'm going to be. They just said, it's your life. So I think that gave me the freedom to like figure it out and then know that they're going to support me. And then they have, fortunately for me, like a support system that allowed me to do that, but they never said, be this. So I didn't graduate top of my class. My brother did, but we're all doing okay.
Yeah. Well, I actually had the same experience. My mom had no expectations or no, like, she never pushed for anything. But we also had my family had a rule, like a no rules rule. But there's no rules in my household, and that was kind of bad. So, so like because I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't a mature enough kid to be able to regulate myself. Like I needed structure in a way that I just wasn't getting. And I think so, like I was just immature and I was a stupid kid. And I think I needed like somebody telling me, hey, that's a stupid thing. Like, like that path, or like just talking to me and giving me like advice about life, I think would have been really helpful. But okay, well, do you have any final pieces of advice for my son?
I think my final advice to your son would be to listen to your mom. And your dad. No, I mean, honestly, like I think parents, you guys are great parents. And, I see all your house/dojo and then your fort and everything. And it's just, he'll be fine. Like the love that you give him, I'm sure he will remember that. And then, he has great parents. He'll be great. So I really hope he just remembers that.
Well, that's why we're making these video or this podcast, is so he could listen to this episodes when he's older and he realizes what he missed. Because I would have loved to have this with my father, or to hear my father giving me advice. Because at the time when he was trying to give me advice, I was not ready for it or didn't care.
Oh, this is cool. It's like in a time capsule, like when you're ready.
Yeah. I mean, basically, yeah. And he'll hear it and be like, my father tells the same stories every time. There's like 10 episodes where I gave the same advice. But anyway, thank you, Pilar. Really, really appreciate it for coming on the show. And thank you everybody for listening. We really appreciate you guys listening. Please tell a friend about the podcast, and please rate, review, and subscribe. And thank you again.